My name is Sherry Preston, and I'm with the Gering Library. And this spring we had a socially distanced wildflower walk. And if you were not able to make it out there, I thought maybe it would be nice if I could put together some slides and then give you the experience, even though you weren't able to make it out in real life. And this way you can enjoy it from the air-conditioned comfort of your own home. I contacted the Platte River Basin Environments to see if they had some property that would work, and they did. They have quite a bit of property in the area, and it is all free public access land, and there's a lot of great hiking out there, and there's also hunting when it's in season. The red pieces on this map are owned by them. There's the Bead Mountain Ranch south of town, the Carter Canyon Ranch, and then there's another place further west of that. We were on the Carter Canyon Ranch by the North P there. The green areas are owned by the Nebraska Game and Parks, and they're also free to access if you happen to have a park permit. And I'm not sure about the Nature Conservancy properties. While my husband and I were out there setting up the plant line, we used a couple of books, and we also used the Nebraska Wildflower app. The Nebraska Wildflower app is a great resource. You can download it on your phone, and it doesn't use any data. So if you're where you don't have cell service, you can still use it. You can input like the color of the flower, and then also the petal numbers, and then you can input the flower shape and some leaf structures if you know about that. And if you don't, you can just hit find, and then it'll give you some things to select from, and it's a great resource. I also recommend the Merlin Bird ID app. When we were out there, there were a lot of birds, and I thought, well, maybe people would be interested in identifying birds while they're out there looking at the flowers. So anyways, those are both great resources you can add to your phone. The books we used, this book on the left is a local book, and it's kind of just for the Wildcat Hills. And the lady that did it, Connie McKinney, did a great job. She takes great pictures. It's interesting, it's short, and it just has the stuff we're going to find in this area in it. I think it's out of print, so hopefully we'll get that back in print at some point and people can buy them again. The book on the right is a publication of the Nebraska Game and Parks, and John Farrar is a phenomenal photographer, and it is really a great book. It has great pictures. The only drawback is it has stuff from all across the state, so there's quite a few things that you're not going to find in our area, but they're both great resources to have, and I use both of them a lot. This is our first flower, the Western Wallflower, and it has a little ball-shaped yellow flower. This year, because it was dry, several of the plants were a little different shaped than usual or stunted. Most of the wallflowers we saw out there were kind of umbrella-shaped and not so much ball-shaped. The flowers have an unpleasant scent, and the wallflowers are related to the mustards. And as you can see here, there's a little seed pod, and those are full of little teeny tiny seeds. Our next flower is the serrate leaf evening primrose. Early settlers would have used various primroses to treat things like asthma, hiccups, and they mixed it, a concoction of it, with honey and used it as a cough syrup. In modern times, researchers have found that primroses can be used to treat a variety of skin issues. And this little guy is a silverleaf scurf pea. It's related in the bean and pea family. The Lakota would have used this in a tea for headaches, and they also burned it to repel mosquitoes. The Dakota used it to treat tuberculosis. This is a sandwort. This hardy little guy has a huge taproot, and it thrives in rocky, dry, thin soils with not a whole lot of dirt on top. They have leaves and flowers that are kind of designed to conserve water. And when we first got out there were a lot of these, and as the 2 weeks went on, the flowers were fewer and far between and more bedraggled looking. This is needle and thread grass. and it is one of the earlier grasses that starts growing in our area. They have a needle, which is right here, and then there's this thread that goes out of the needle. And at the bottom of the thread, there's some really hard twists. And the theory is, and I'm not sure I agree with it, that as the awns, which is the thread, as it twists and dries out, when it lands on the ground, it'll twist and kind of drill the seed into the ground, which I'm not entirely sure happens, but that's what they say. And this is a bladder, Great Plains bladder pod. It is a member of the mustard family, and these are the little bladders that the seeds are in. That's why it's named that. We just found a couple of these out there, and when we were first out there, there was some flowers, and then by the end of the time we were out there, it was all just seeds. And this is the yucca. It's also known as a soapweed. The petals of this flower are edible, and they're pretty yummy. I could totally see eating them in a salad. Other parts of the flower are also edible. And before it turns into a flower, there's like the stalk when it's shooting up. Several tribes would have used that for food. Yucca or soapweed kind of grows from, I don't know, probably in the middle of Mexico all the way up to Canada. And so there were lots and lots of tribes would have used this as a food source and also for other things. They would have used the fibers of the leaves to make mats and sandals. And the Lakota made a soap from the root to treat lice. And other tribes would have used various concoctions from this plant to treat sprains and stop bleeding, and also to promote hair growth. This is the small lupine. Lupines are found worldwide. They were named by the Romans after the wolf, which is a lupin or lupus. It's a legume, and so the seeds are edible like other beans, but I don't think they were much of a food source in this area. And this right here is called annual eriogonum, and it's kind of a crazy name for a plant. It has an umbrella-shaped flowering stalk. Some people think of it as like a wild yarrow, but it's not related, and it doesn't smell like yarrow. In fact, it doesn't really smell much like anything. It's related to pussy toes. The Lakota would have used this in a recipe for bleaching hides. And here is just a picture, kind of a little further back, of our hillside that our wildflower walk started on. The brownish orange grass in there is cheap grass, and it's invasive and it's pervasive also. It's all over the place. There's really not much you can do about it. This is a wild onion, and they're very edible. There's another plant that grows in this area that looks a lot like a wild onion. It is, however, poisonous, so if you don't know what you're doing, this is not a plant to try out on your own. If bees make honey out of wild onion flowers, that tastes accordingly. Local tribes would have used it for cooking. It was an important source of vitamin A and vitamin C out here on the prairie. And both the natives and pioneers would have used them, different concoctions of onions, for a variety of medical purposes. This little guy is the brittle cactus, and they spread themselves by kind of launching their little pads up into the air and landing on your pants leg or on the leg of livestock, and as they walk around they'll fall off and then they'll sprout and start again. They're kind of obnoxious. They also spread by seed though, so they've got this whole reproductive thing figured out. This is prairie June grass. It is another early grass, and it's just kind of a staple. It doesn't really take over. It just kind of holds its own. It's kind of attractive in a rock garden if you have such a thing at your house. This is called mountain cat's eye. Sometimes it's called popcorn plant. There's a large variety of related species that you can find throughout everything west of the Missouri River. And this is flax. When we first went out there, there was a lot of flax and none of it was blooming. And as the 2 weeks went on, it started blooming, and by the end of the second week, it was not blooming. So it has kind of a short blooming period. The natives would have used the seeds, flax seeds, also for a food source. And this is Western salsify, or sometimes it's called goat's beard, and it is it's an introduced species, and it's related to the sunflowers and the dandelions, but it doesn't really take over. It just kind of, you find them here and there. And I did some research and I did not find any information about whether or not wishing on these seed heads when you blow on them would make your wish come true or not. So I don't know if they work that way like dandelions do. And here is a scarlet gara. There's a lot of different garas. Some of them grow to be several feet tall. This little guy was probably, I don't know, maybe a little over a foot tall. The Lakota would have rubbed this on their hands and used it to help them catch horses. So that's something to keep in mind. And this is a penstemon. There's several different species of penstemon that grow in Nebraska. Only one of them has any scent, and it happens to be an endangered species, and it doesn't really grow in this area at all. But there's a white variety that grows here, and this little purple variety, and then there's kind of a lavender pink variety that is tall and slender, but we didn't have any out there. And these also don't really have any scent. This next one is Indian rice grass, and it's another early grass. It's related to the needle and thread grass. And I think the Zuni would have used the seeds of this for wheat before they had corn. And but it does have a nice big seed, and I think doves like to eat the seeds as well. And here's a plat thistle. It's native, and so it does not spread, and it's not a problem when you see them in a pasture. You might have one here and there, but they don't take over like the invasive introduced species do. The leaves and roots of this plant and other native thistles were kind of a minor food source for local tribes. And this is prairie sandreed. It was not blooming when I was out there, but there was a lot of it, and so I marked some of it. It's an important plant in the Great Plains. It reproduces by seed, obviously, and then it also reproduces underground, forming kind of a great big patch. And so sometimes you'll be driving along and you'll see a great big yellow patch on the hillside of a pasture, and that's probably prairie sandreed. The Lakota would have used the seed head as a charm. They would have worn it that way, and then they also used it to clean their ceremonial pipes out. And this is low fleabane. There's several different fleabanes in Nebraska, and the Lakota would have used a relative of this plant to treat everything from sore mouths to rheumatism, and pioneers burned it to prevent fleas, hence the name fleabane. It's also related to the asters, but fleabanes bloom in the spring and early summer, and asters bloom in August and September, and they're usually more colorful than the fleabanes. There are 15 different kinds of milkweeds in Nebraska. This little guy is a sand milkweed. Most of the milkweeds have pink blossoms, but this one has a green one, and obviously there's a couple of little fat bees in there making themselves at home. It was an important food source for many local tribes. They ate the whole plant in various stages. They ate the flowers, and then they ate the shoots before they became flowers, and they also used the roots and possibly the leaves to do different things. And during World War II, the Army had people collecting not this particular milkweed, but different milkweed species, the seeds from it, and they use those to stuff life jackets because they're pretty buoyant and very fluffy. And this is a prickly pear cactus, and they were really pretty this year. The flowers, after they get done blooming, they form a little pod that's called a tuna. And many tribes, prickly pear cactus are prevalent across the Great Plains, and many tribes would have used these for a food source, but the tuna they would have used. Also, wildlife eat the tuna. And not only that, they would have also burned or scraped the spines off of the cactus pads, and they would have eaten those as well. And actually you can find them in a grocery store. But there's more than one species of prickly pear, and I think the other species has a lot fewer spines on it, so they probably would have avoided this kind for that particular purpose. And this little guy is cudweed sagewort. It provides forage for deer and antelope, and also sheep will eat it. Cattle don't touch it much. It has fine little hairs on the leaves, and that kind of gives it a soft gray appearance. The Cheyenne had many uses for this, including for purification rituals, and they used it in the Sundance ceremony. It was a pretty important plant for the Cheyenne and other native tribes around here. It also, like the prairie sandreed, grows underground and forms kind of colonies. This is woolly Indian wheat, and it takes over on rangeland that has been abused, but there wasn't hardly any of. There was just one little plant out there, and when I went to take a picture of him, he was gone. And so this is not a picture that I took. I'm pretty sure that probably my antelope found it. She ate a lot of stuff. There was an antelope out there when we set up the plant line, and she was kind of huffing at us. And as we left, she probably went over there and went, "Hey, they trimmed around some of my favorite foods. This is great." And they marked them with flags that I can chew on afterwards. So she spent a lot of time out there after we were gone, and I had to go out and replace things a few times, and that's why my number line was never in order, because after the first time I had to find different plants. But anyways, that's what happens when you're in nature. Our next one is fringed sagewort. Livestock will graze this in the winter, and wildlife graze it year-round. It's really soft. Both natives and pioneers use it as antiseptic, and several tribes used it for towels and deodorant. And I'm not sure what the natives did for diapers, but it's the sort of thing I can see them lining maybe one of their baby backpacks and with it, because it seems like it'd be really soft. This is miner's candle. It is related to the mountain cat's eye that we saw earlier. Sheep will eat this. It's really, really, really furry, as you can kind of see. But it has a lot of bristly seeds, and so they stick into sheep's wool, and it causes problems for the sheep ranchers. And this right here is a Hymenopopus. There's not much about it. It's just a little yellow flower on a tall spindly stalk. It's related to the sunflowers. But that's all this is the full of the flower. There's 44 different Hymenopopus species, so there's a lot of variety in those. This is a scarlet globe mallow. I did not take this picture out there, obviously. Because it was a dry year, there was a lot of this out there, but it never was blooming when we were out there. There was a little bit at the beginning, and then I think he got eaten, and then I found another one later on. But on a good year, there will be a lot of this out there. In fact, after the rain recently, there might be. Medicine men would have used this to coat their hands, and so that when they reached into boiling water, they could impress their friends and neighbors. The Cheyenne used it in ceremonies and to make medicine taste better. So anyways, this is kind of a pretty little flower. It also doesn't really smell very much. This is a purple prairie clover. It belongs to the pea and bean family. Domestic livestock and wildlife will eat it. Some tribes would have made brooms from the dried out plants. This is threadleaf sedge. It looks like it's a grass, but it's actually not. It's a different family altogether from the grasses. And this is a hardy little plant. It starts growing early in the year, and it maintains its nutritional value throughout the year. Somebody told me years ago that this plant is what puts pounds on steers. So there's a lot of it in this part of the world. This is a prickly poppy. A lot of times people think it's going to be a thistle, but it's not. It's actually in the poppy family. And it has a yellow sap in the stem and in the leaves. The Lakota would have used that to dye arrows yellow. And our last plant is the ground plum milkvetch. The flower would have been done blooming before June started. When we were first out there, we found some of the little seed pods, these little guys over here. You can see they're kind of elongated. I don't know if that is because it is kind of a dry year or if they're not quite done plumping up. But they're kind of fun if you're walking out in the prairie and you see something that looks like a red ping pong ball out there. It will be one of these guys, and they taste like green beans, and they have kind of a, they're kind of maybe like a cucumber on the inside. But they're pretty, I like to eat them when I see them. They were not a large food source for the local tribes, but I'm sure they used to eat them on occasion, and they also use them to treat toothaches and insect bites. So anyways, if you guys have liked this, I'd be happy to do another one at some point, and maybe later in the year, and get the next range of wildflowers, because there's always something different blooming out there. Everything has its own season. And so this is just kind of a picture on the other side of the fence from my wildflower walk, and some good hiking in there, as you can see. So anyways, there you go, the end.